Dear students, welcome to second lecture on conflict and resolution. Now in the last slide, we discussed conflict in general. In this second part of the chapter, we move beyond basic conflict concept and focus on higher level of conflict within organizations. We will examine interpersonal, group and organizational conflict and understand why they arise, especially due to structural interdependence. This section also explains how managers can systematically handle conflict. First by identifying it, then diagnosing its causes, and finally applying appropriate strategies. The key idea is that effective leaders do not eliminate conflict completely. Instead, they manage it in a way that transforms into learning, coordination, and organizational improvement. Interpersonal conflict is what most people think of when they hear the word conflict. It involves two or more people who are in competing position. We can split this into two categories, vertical and horizontal. Vertical conflict happens between a superior and subordinate. Usually it occurs because the boss tries to control the employee's behavior and the employees resist. If not resolved, this can lead to a complete breakdown in cooperation, which is very dangerous for the team efficiency. Horizontal conflict occur between people at the same level, for example, two managers in different departments. Since they often have to share information or ask for advice, any friction between them can slow down the entire workflow. The reason for these clashes often come down to the three things: the nature of the people involved, their ego states, and their differing value system. Now, let's look at the human variable. First, we have ego states. This refers to how a person thinks and behaves at a specific time. If two people are in incompatible ego states, for example, both trying to be dominant boss in a conversation, conflict is inevitable. Second is the value system. This is personal philosophy each person uses to judge a situation. Two people can look at the exact same problem but suggest different solutions because their values are different. Third are socio-cultural factors. People come from different backgrounds, religions, and regions. These backgrounds shape how they perceive the world. What one person sees as efficient, another might see as rude. Finally, we have situational variable like role ambiguity and interest conflict. Sometimes people are not naturally hostile. They are just placed in a situation where their interests clash. If two salespeople are fighting over the same client, the conflict is about the situation, not their personalities. Now, moving up the ladder, we reach group level conflict. This can be intra-group within one team or intergroup between two different teams. Intra-group conflict usually happens when a team faces a brand new problem or when people with very different political or religious views are forced to work together. Intergroup conflict is often more complex. It can even start as a small fight between two people that eventually divides the whole group into two varying factions. In an organization, groups must interact to get things done. But if the relationship is not positive, the interaction turns into a battle. Why do these groups fight? The reasons are usually built into the structure of the company itself. The first cause is goal incompatibility. A classic example is the conflict between marketing and production departments. Marketing wants to offer customer five different versions of a product to increase sales, but production wants to make only one version to keep cost low. Their goals are in direct opposition. The second cause is resource sharing. In almost every organization, resources like money, space, and staffs are limited. When groups have to fight for their shares of the budget, it creates tension. The third cause is the task relationship. Many tasks are sequenced. Group A must finish their work before Group B can start. If Group A is late, Group B get frustrated. This functional interdependence is a major breeding ground for conflict. We also have absorption of uncertainty. If the finance department makes a rule about how the marketing department can spend money and marketing doesn't agree with that rule, conflict arises. Then there are attitudinal shifts. If a team starts a project with a lack of trust or a secretive attitude, it is much more likely that a conflict will develop. Finally, look at the reward system. If a company gives a reward based on individual performance rather than team performance, it can hurt cooperation. When people feel they are in a win loss competition with their own colleagues just to go to get a bonus, the organization suffers. Instead of working together to beat the competition, they end up fighting each other. At the highest level, we have organizational conflict. Intra-organizational conflict is basically the sum of everything we discussed so far. All the fights between individuals and groups inside the company. But there is also inter-organizational conflict. This happens between two different organizations. This might involve a battle between a company and the government over regulations, or between a labor union and the management. It could even be a conflict between two rival companies. Some of these are regulated by state laws and courts, while others are handled through negotiation. No matter the level, the goal for any manager is the same: to step in and resolve the issue before it causes permanent damage. To summarize this section, we have explored the three levels of conflict. We saw how interpersonal clashes can be vertical or horizontal, how groups fight over resources and incompatible goals, and how organizational conflict can even involve external entities like the government. So here is rhetorical question. If conflict is so deeply embedded in the structure of an organization, is there any hope of managing it? The answer is a resounding yes. In fact, managing conflict is one of the most important skills a leader can have. Let's look at the steps and strategies for doing that. When a conflict arises, a manager should not just react blindly. There is a three-step process to follow. The preliminary step is simply knowing the conflict. You need to identify it early. The earlier you catch a conflict, the easier it is to fix. A small spark is easy to put out, but a full-blown fire is not. During this stage, the manager must be objective. It is hard to keep emotions out of it, but you must listen to both sides with an open mind. You don't have to agree with them, but you must understand them. The most important rule here is that No one should be allowed to exploit the situation for personal gain. Your job is to find a fair solution that helps the organization, not a pick to a winner. The second step is diagnosing the issue. You have to ask, what is this conflict actually about? Is it a disagreement over facts? Are the goals different? Is there a fight over the method being used? Or is it a crisis of values? Once you know what the conflict is, you have to figure out why it is started. Was it a lack of information? Did the two parties perceive the same event differently because of their backgrounds? Or was it a role-based conflict where a boss and a subordinate had different views on how urgent a task was? By identifying the root cause, you can choose the right strategy. If the problem is a lack of information, you provide the facts. If the problem is a clash of values, you might need a different approach entirely. Now we move to the strategies. The first and most powerful is establishing common goals, also known as superordinate goals. These are high-level goals that are both parties care about, which can only be achieved if they work together. When people realize they need each other to succeed, they are much more likely to put their differences aside. We can also change the reward system. If the current system creates a win-lose situation, we should change it to a win-win system that rewards the entire department or organization. This shifts the focus from me versus you to us versus the problem. By aligning everyone's interest with the success of the larger system, we naturally reduce the amount of internal fighting. Sometimes the problem is not the people, it's the way the organization is built. To fix this, we can change structural arrangements. One way is to reduce interdependence. If two departments are fighting because they are too closely linked, we can try to make them more independent. Another way is to reduce shared resources. If there is not enough equipment for everyone, the management might choose to buy more so people don't have to compete for it. We can also use member rotation. By shifting people from one group to another, we force them to walk in others person's shoes. This helps them to see bigger picture and reduce the us versus them mentality. It has been proven that even when this rotation is mandatory, it is very effective at building understanding and speeding up agreements. In complex cases, we can appoint a liaison or an integrator. This is someone whose full-time job is to manage the relationship between two varying departments. This person must speak the language of both groups and be seen as neutral. Sometimes we even bring in outside consultants, human relations experts to help change attitudes. If all else fails, we use dominance through position. This is when a common superior steps in and makes a final decision. The boss might say, here is what we are going to do, and both parties must accept it. This could involve transferring people to different departments or simply issuing a warning. While this doesn't always solve the underlying feelings, it does stop the conflict from disrupting the work. Finally, let's look at the specific action individual can take. The most positive is problem solving. Here both parties openly share information and try to find a solution that satisfies everyone. This works best when the conflict is a simple misunderstanding. The next is avoidance or withdrawal. This is when someone just leaves the field or refuses to talk about issues. While this might stop the argument in the short term, it doesn't actually resolve the problem. Then there is accommodating or smoothing. This is based on cooperativeness. One party decides to go along with the other person's request just to keep the peace. They focus on what they have in common and ignore their differences. While this is nice for maintaining relationship, it can be problem if the underlying issues is never actually fixed. One of the most common method is compromising. This is a give and take system. No one wins everything, but no one loses everything either. Each party gives up something to reach an agreement. If a third party helps with this, it is called mediation. If they do it themselves, it calls bargaining. This is how most labor management fights are settled. The final and most risky action is confrontation. This is where the parties are allowed to fight it out and see who is stronger. This is rarely a good idea because the loser will often feel defeated and seek revenge later. However, in some cases, it can be used for organization development to clear the air once and for all. As a manager, your goal is to choose the mix of these actions that best fit to your specific situations. To conclude our lecture, managing conflict requires a careful three-step process of knowing, diagnosing, and acting. If we use structural changes like member rotation or specific actions like problem solving and compromising, no single approach works every time. But keeping communication channels open is always essential. Let me leave you with one final rhetorical question. Is a conflict-free organization actually a healthy one? Based on what we have learned, the answer is no. A healthy organization is not one where people never disagree. It is one where people know how to turn those disagreements into better ideas, stronger bonds, and a brighter future for the company or organization. Thank you for your attention throughout the unit. I hope this session has helped you to gain a clear understanding of the conflict and conflict resolution. Once again, thank you for your time and attention.